the shooting range. In this episode, the mystery of the P-39 Airacobra, why the Soviets were the only Allied pilots that couldn't get enough of this fighter. Bringing back the challenge, we try to get through a racing map on a jet bomber. Hotline, the developers answer questions that you've left in the comments. But first, let's start with exceptional mobility, great gun, no armor. The Spähpanzer Ru 251, shenanigans galore. The Ru 251 is a light reconnaissance tank. It's small, fast, packs a punch, and has almost no armor. All of that means that this is a machine best suited for covert operation and sneak attacks. Is there an SP gun somewhere that makes the lives of your teammates a living hell? The Ru 251 will take care of that. Are a few enemy SPAAGs really hurting your aircraft? The Ru 251 is already on its way. But don't fall under the impression this little guy can't deal with big targets. It can deal with anyone, just not in a face-to-face confrontation. Basically, you have two options when fighting armored enemies. HEAT shells are great for engaging an enemy from the front, from a nice, well-covered position, of course. And HESH rounds will obliterate enemy crew if you land a good clean hit on one of their sides. The Ru 251 is also one of the few vehicles that can literally save the day if things go south. It can move from one position to another at lightning speed, something that you can use, for example, to restart the cap counter at one of the captured zones, forcing enemies to split their forces, bleeding them off from the front line, and all of that, while you lie in wait to deal with them one by one. A few extra tips. A tank might look like the Leopard's smaller brother, but it has a lower turret traverse speed, and its gun is not equipped with a stabilizer. The bottom line is that you probably shouldn't try to shoot at your enemies on the go. Be wary of the enemy aircraft. In their presence, stick to trees or any other form of cover. You are very, very vulnerable to attacks coming from above. Your opponents won't even have to spend a rocket to make you go up in flames. And you don't even think about returning fire. You'll just alert enemy pilots to your presence and give your position away. Once again, you're not a frontline fighter. Be clever. Move in the shadows. And then the opponents will be afraid of going anywhere, even on their own side of the field. HEAT shells are for the frontal armor. HESH rounds are there for thin armor and/or the sides. It could be a very basic thing to say, but if you shoot an HEAT round at the enemy's side, it might just make a pretty hole without damaging any of the equipment or eliminating a single crew member. And the last thing, have fun. This tank is great for all sorts of crazy shenanigans behind the enemy lines, so don't be too careful. It takes a daredevil to ride one of these. Next up is the story of the most Soviet-American fighter aircraft ever made, the Bell P-39 Airacobra. Surprisingly, the P-39 wasn't a very popular pick in the US Air Force. Some pilots hated it so much that they intentionally broke it in the hope of getting a replacement in the form of a Lightning, a Mustang, or a Thunderbolt. The US shipped the Airacobras to the British, but it turned out that the Brits weren't big fans either. Eventually, these aircraft made it to the USSR, and for the Soviet pilots, it was love at first sight. How could this happen? It wasn't a bad aircraft after all, far from it. What was it that the Red Army pilots could see in it, and others couldn't? Heck, just look at Alexander Pokrishkin, one of the top aces of the Allies. He preferred the Airacobra to any other plane. Maybe the Soviet-made fighters were that bad? Not really. Some accidental fights between the Allied aircraft clearly showed that the Soviet planes were nothing to sneeze at. Maybe it's because these planes provided the Soviets with the means of reliable radio communication. In fact, the USSR had an option of obtaining a practically infinite number of compact and powerful American radio stations and then installing them on Soviet fighters. What was the reason then? Maybe the US were intentionally selling only the bad tech, the tech they didn't want themselves. Wrong again. America offered the USSR anything it could possibly want because Stalin would have to pay for it. And not with a dollar, but with pure gold. So it was in the best interests of the US to sell every top-notch fighter and bomber, every new technology available. It would be outdated in a couple of years anyway. The North American Aviation, for example, was promoting its magnificent P-51 with everything they had. They were sending every single new modification to the USSR, until there was a clear message coming from Moscow: we don't want the Mustang. The Lockheed Corporation offered the Soviets the P-38 Lightning, with the same result. Even the United Kingdom was keen on getting some of that Soviet gold and offered their northern allies the Spitfires and Typhoons. And keep in mind, the Royal Air Force lacked good fighters until very late in the war, and the Boeing and the Consolidated would gladly sell an extra 100 or 2 of the B-17s or the B-24s. But the Soviet High Command demanded the Airacobra again and again. So what did they see in it that the Allies have missed? Here's what. In every war involving aircraft, there is always a certain class of a warplane that defines it, and all other planes are built round that. In Western Europe and in the Pacific, such a leading design was defined in the very first few days of the war, and it was a heavy bomber with a big combat radius. The US and Great Britain created whole families of those 4-engined monsters that were flying at impossible altitudes to keep themselves away from the enemy aircraft guns. They had to be protected from enemy fighters, and that's what those Mustangs, Lightnings, and Thunderbolts were really good at. They had drop fuel tanks, powerful high-altitude engines, and turbo superchargers that were crazy expensive at the time. All this gear helped the plane to perform well at high altitudes and, basically, allowed it to escort the bombers anywhere. And the low-altitude Airacobra, with its Allison engine and a measly gear-driven centrifugal supercharger, couldn't possibly compete with them. But in the skies of the Eastern Front, the situation was completely different. The core aircraft was not a bomber, but a mass-produced close air support aircraft, like the Il-2, for example. This armored beast would fly at ground-hugging altitude, almost hitting Nazi helmets with its propeller and destroying everything in its path. The extremely low altitudes were also the domain of tactical dive bombers like the PE-2 and the fearsome PO-2. Naturally, Soviet pilots preferred the American aircraft that would fare just as well under these conditions. Aircraft like the B-25 or the A-20. Of course, those needed some fighters to escort them as well. But here's the catch. Why would you want a turbo supercharge that costs more than the rest of the plane's gear to fight at altitudes below 5,000 meters? There was simply no need to have those. The Airacobra, with its gear-driven centrifugal supercharger, would do just fine. There's also a problem with weather. That wasn't the Pacific, where the sky was always crystal clear. In the European part of the USSR, it was cloudy 300 days of the year, and that covers everything from a few stray clouds to an impenetrable grey shroud which offered zero visibility. Are you a fan of vertical maneuvering? Then welcome to the grave, son. The horizontal turning flight was the way to go, and when it came to it, the Airacobra performed really well. You just needed an experienced pilot. For the Soviet aviators that learned how to fly on the E-16, that was a piece of cake. That's partially why the Germans used to say, "Non-flying weather is when the Russians are most dangerous in the skies." And that landing gear, oh boy, it did its job on almost any surface, and that was the only thing that mattered. There was also that 37mm gun that could destroy almost enemy aircraft with a single shot. What do you say? The Mustang has 6 guns? Huh, so what? They still weren't as deadly. The Airacobra was a kind of ugly duckling in the West, but in the USSR, it became a star. There were poems and songs written about it, and it was a dream for many Soviet pilots to fly it one day. Actually, it was so good that its manufacturer, the Bell Aircraft Corporation, created an even better fighter of the same type, the P-63 King Cobra. The USA didn't need it? Not a problem. But it's a story for another time. We haven't done challenges in quite some time, have we? Let's get back to it with some air racing. racing can be very tough, especially if you have to do it in the mountains and on a big, bulky plane that can't turn a dam. That's exactly why we decided to go through the small map on a British Canberra, that jet bomber. Yeah, an impeccable choice, we say. Ready, steady, go! Here we come. The speed right now is around 550 kph, which is a bit too much for the sharp turns. Oh well, we were right, see? Okay, let's get back on track and try not to smash into the next obstacle. Oh, come on! Who put this bridge here? This kind of level design is really discriminatory against big planes. Oh well. Should be smooth sailing from now on. God damn it. Okay, great, no problem. Let's move on. This part of the map is pretty straightforward. First, we go straight, and then there are a few tight turns in that gorge. And Canberra pilots really love tight turns, don't they? We speed through the first part, slow down for the second, and that's done. Surprising. Now, there is another open area, and all that's left to do is to turn around this rock. Okay. Done. 3.5 minutes. Let's say that is not a record run for such a small map. Okay, now that we've learned the map, let's do it without crashes. Remember the accident that occurred at the start of the map? We do as well. So we slow down a bit. That's one turn. That's another one. Good. Now there's that horrible bridge to take care of. Let's extend our flaps and lose some speed. Yes, we managed to squeeze through. Now there's a sharp turn to the left. God damn it, we missed it again. Who needs checkpoints anyway? We'll have to make up for the time we've lost here in the next open area. No air brake for now. Full speed ahead. Here comes the last dangerous area. We deploy the air brake and flaps. There is some vigorous stick action. And we're through. In a few moments, the race is over. 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Not that bad for a jet bomber. Just to be 100% honest, in order to even out the odds, we got rid of all our bombs. It could be done with bombs, of course. You just have to be even more careful with your speed. Try it out for yourself. Get ready for the traditional last part of our show. Hotline. Developers answering questions from the comments. Speaking strictly, it's not the most serious-minded section of the show. If you want answers to be given with solemn faces, feel free to appeal to the official War Thunder forums. Here, we'll have a more light-hearted discussion of the big questions of War Thunder. The first message comes from a player called Andre Gameplays. He's been asking us over 9,000 times in just 54 episodes. That's at least 167 questions per episode. Commendable effort.
Will there be a single mission where you're flying a B-29 with nukes, bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
No, there won't. And it's not because the game doesn't have nuclear weapons in it or because of the obvious ethical considerations, which are both a factor, of course, but because why would anybody even want it? It doesn't make for exciting gameplay, to be sure. We're simply not interested in anything like that. A player that goes by the name of Bartos Pikuza asks, well, basically, he wants to know if we're going to add even bigger ships, like aircraft carriers or heavy cruisers. Hey, mate, we do not plan to, as we explained at least a few times, but we're open to experiments. As you are probably aware, we initially didn't plan to have destroyers as well. And now look at us, 4 destroyers and counting. Let's just see what happens. And the last, very important message is written by The Master. Hey, Gaijin, did you know that your name means stranger in Japanese? Yep. And do you know that your name means that you have a complicated relationship with the doctor? That's it for today, but feel free to write your questions in the comments below. We do read them all, and you might see some of them answered in the next episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you on the shooting range.